It's interesting to see the Halo series composer, Mr. Marty O'Donnell, saying that the video game industry is pandering because they fear on being on the wrong side of some special interest groups, which can be very loud and very annoying. And when I'm reading this, my conclusion is that Mr. Marty O'Donnell himself fears this so-called special interest groups because he doesn't want to name them. He doesn't give any details about them. They're like Voldemort. If you say who they are, then bad things happen, right? And, while I do agree with Mr. Marty O'Donnell, in part, I do think, like, this is a small piece of the puzzle. It takes a lot more than that to cause a multi-billion-dollar industry to suffer as much as the gaming industry is suffering now. This is why I made a video earlier to show how video games look like in 2004, how many juggernauts came out that year, and comparing it with this year, you guys can see the difference yourselves. Like, you are gamers, I don't have to go into details. But yeah, like, for a while, it's pretty much how it started. Like, this is the conversation from 2016 that Mr. O'Donnell is finding out just now. But back in 2016, yeah, like, you had the game journalists, which would write negative reviews about your company, like they're doing now with Wukong, except that now no one cares. But back then, like, if they made accusations of sexism or racism, it's not that gamers actually gave a shit. Like, I've been told representation is very important. It's very important to see yourself in the medium. And they also say that gamers are racist and sexist. So according to their own ideology, based on this, like, gamers would praise companies that were like that. But no, it wasn't that. It was that when the press was making those articles, the shares would go down because the shareholders would get spooked, right? Like, the shareholders, most of them weren't gamers, and they didn't go on gaming forums and to talk with the community. But what they would do is like, okay, well, I invested a couple of $100 million in EA Games and Ubisoft. Let's see what the gaming press is writing about it. And if they were to see that the gaming press is labeling accusations of racismus and sexismus, then they would be like, well, I don't want to be associated with that. So that's why the stock market was influenced. And it wasn't just the gaming press. It was also like some influential people on Twitter. Like, there were a lot of unhinged individuals that would do the groundwork, the activism, in order to dig up through game developers' tweets. And, if there was a game developer that maybe was incredibly talented, but like 9 years ago he said the racismus, well, you had the activists on Twitter digging through it and finding the racismus and then saying that it's unacceptable. And then the gaming press would take that and would make articles about it. And in order to avoid that, you had to hire consultants, which often were also friends with people who worked in the gaming press. And in exchange for money, they would give you the protection in making all of this go away. Right? So if you're looking at Wukong right now, it's being attacked by IGN, and it's like a lot of sexismus. But when you're looking at a game like Hades, there's no negativity. In fact, there's backlash if you complain about it. If you look at a game like Baldur's Gate 3, which had articles in IGN praising it for its broad view of human sexuality, because you can have sex with demons, with bears, and there's a lot of pansexuality in that game. And all they talked about for months were like sex, Baldur's Gate, right? And then you look at Stellar Blade, which doesn't have a single sex scene in it, and they're crazy. Like, why is that happening? Well, it's because Stellar Blade and Shift Up didn't pay the protection tax. And they may have buckled a little bit with Sony, but they didn't actually, hire consultants. So this is how the grift started, basically, right? Like, what Mr. O'Donnell is saying here is that the special interest groups that are very loud and annoying, he's basically talking about the 2014 era. Now it's not about the special interest groups. In fact, they don't have any power. And we noticed this when they tried to cancel a couple of games. Like, they tried to cancel Hogwarts. They failed. They tried to cancel Stellar Blade. They failed. They tried to cancel the Coffin of Ashley and Lele. They failed. So all in all, things have changed dramatically since 2014. No one reads the press. Publications like Kotaku, they have just 2 viewers. Like they're posting articles and no one cares. Everyone watches Asmongold or other streamers. And the people on Twitter, I don't know what happened with them. Either they grew up or they're not interested in this subject anymore, but they're not doing activism. And the few ones that aren't effective as they used to be. So what ends up happening is that, unlike 2014, you can make a controversial game and you won't get the backlash. So why aren't things changing then? Well, things aren't changing because if you look at the gaming companies, they actually replaced their talent with talentless people. They did this type of race-based nepotism, this ideological nepotism, if you will, where they ended up firing some of their best artists, some of their best developers, and in exchange they hired new faces fresh off the academia just because they had the connection with the HR lady, with the diversity officer or whatever. And now they're incapable of producing good stuff. It's not just that the stories that are affected by the consultants are cringe, but most of these games don't even work on launch. And as I keep saying, like, most of these games have teams way bigger than games used to have back in 2004. They have more budget, and they're shit. So one of the reasons, as I mentioned, is because of the replacement of the talent. Secondly, a lot of these ideologues that used to be on Twitter or that used to be pushing the idea that studios are racist, sexist, blah, 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 are now in the companies themselves, and they are hiring their friends. So they changed the corporate culture completely to the point where it's very difficult now to make any sort of pushback or any sort of changes. And then you also have like the ESG funds, which did contribute as well. So yeah, like for these AAA studios, it's very difficult to change course now. And there's also a lot of censorship. Like back in the day, you could just make a video game about whatever you wanted. Like, there was no censorship, like, create anything, right? So you get games like Manhunt, which I think, like, has an adult-only rating, without the game actually being pornographic. It's just that the violence is so over the top that it got an AO rating. And you wouldn't be able to do something like that now, right? You wouldn't be able to make a Postal game, and as we saw, even when they're remaking GTA, they're having to censor it. And a lot of the censorship comes from the publishers themselves, which are also infested by these type of activists, the special interest groups, if you will. And it also comes from the distribution platforms. That, like, Steam itself, for instance, says that you're not allowed to have hate speech in your game. Like, what does that mean? They don't really say, right? So can you use the N-word in a game? I mean, a game costs around $100,000 to make. Do you want to risk it? This is just one example. Now, of course, you know, the N-word is just like the most obvious thing, which is why I'm giving it as an example. But what about other themes? Can you make a game like Postal, for instance, right? Now, Postal is on Steam, but it has been grandfathered in, if you will. Like, it's tolerated because it was created in an era where it was allowed and it already became popular. But if you try to make another Postal now where, you know, like in Postal 2, you're actually fighting against the Muslims, and I think like the Christians come out with bazookas and shit. Like, it's all parody. It's all for the laughs. But if you try pulling something like this today, I don't know, like Steam may actually reject your game, and then you spend more than $100,000 making something, and you may have your house on mortgage, you may have a bank loan or something in order to produce this game, and now you can't sell it. So it's not as simple as it looks. Like, and not to mention, there's also a lot of government censorship now. I keep giving the example where if you make a game that has smoking in it or drinking alcohol, it's problematic in some countries. So yeah, it's not just government censorship. It's not just the censorship from the publishers, the censorship from the platforms, the censorship from the community itself can sometimes be a thing. So it's very difficult to create art now under these conditions. This is why we're not going to see any more Postal games, at least not for the foreseeable future. Maybe, you know, with AI, if games become really cheap to make and it doesn't take much effort to patch together some sort of AA video game, like we may see a resurgence, a new birth of good art. But until then, yeah, we're just going to get for a while games that don't even work on launch, and eventually the AA games are going to rise, but they're not going to be as good as the games that we grew up with, which were incredibly edgy, and they weren't afraid to pull any punches because they're going to offend some group or another. So let me know what you guys think, though. And as usual, I will see you on the comment section. And don't forget that I do live stream every week. So if you're interested in that, there's a link to the pinned comment and it will take you to my live stream. And we can talk there. Take care.